Well, each week a group of insiders joins me to offer perspective on some of the week's top stories. This week sounding off on Roger Penske officially taking control of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The Indiana Economic Development Corporation says 2019 was a record year for investment and wages as well. Pleased to welcome this week to the insiders Katz, Korin, Cunningham, co-founding partner Norris Cunningham. Also, Faegre Baker Daniels partner Murray Clark, and Beck Communications Group President Lara Beck. And welcome one and all, and Happy New Year.
Thanks,
Happy
Happy New
2020. Of course, the big story, I think the big story in the past number of years was the sale of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to Roger Penske, Penske Entertainment Corporation. Murray, he took control. He closed on the deal earlier this week, took control. We did an interview, aired at the top of this show. I was part of an event at Banker's Life. He clearly has a very ambitious and I think passionate agenda. But first of all, just that whole sale, there was an emotional piece to it.
Well,
too,
it really
right?
was for people like me and others that have kind of grown up out there. And I think it's worth saying that the impact the Holman family had with that ownership of the track and to the community and the city at large should be noted, and that made it kind of a sad day.
Yeah. How about the future as you look forward?
I think it's awesome, right? If you were going to pick one purchaser, if the community was to pick one purchaser, it had to be Roger Penske, and I think he's got great vision in the short term and the long-sighted vision for the track.
He talked a lot about making improvements to improve the guest experience before this year's race, but also longer term, no specifics, but really wanting to enhance the economic impact of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Yeah, and I think that's really incredibly promising, and I think it's incredibly exciting when you think about the work that the town of Speedway itself has done. I mean, it's invested millions of dollars in redevelopment activities as well, not just in the main street, but pushing forward out to Crawfordsville Road. And then you also think about those zip codes that are adjacent to Speedway and pushing out west. That's really going to also have an impact because some of those are really underserved. So there's some really positive elements to that.
You know, I will say also, Penske is quite the brand, right? I mean, he is in and of himself, quite the brand. And marrying that brand with this iconic event and this iconic venue is really going to be something that I hope portends very well for the future and is really going to be an opportunity for it to really take off, for the Speedway to take off.
And he talks about this as an entertainment venue, which it has become, I think, in a lot of ways. But looking at and referencing the what's called the Net Promoter Score that entertainment venues use, that score for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway at 85 ranks up there with Apple and Disney, some of these big brands. So he's very anxious to look at new events, whether they're concerts, other racing events, and those types of things.
Right. And I think the other part, too, is when you talk about that brand piece, you also have to talk about the loyalty, especially from the racing fans. I mean, everyone feels in this community, and I think in the state, such a sense of excitement around that. And it's something that is very bankable for all of us. And, I mean, we've got some great leadership, too.
Economic development impact. The Indiana Economic Development Corporation this week released its annual report saying 2019 was a record year for jobs and investment in the state. About 300 companies with commitments to locate or expand in the state. But also, Norris, and I'll start with you on this, the average wage at, I think, $28.60 an hour, the highest since the IEDC was formed.
Yeah, that's actually one of the most impressive feats. I mean, the overall number of $8.4 billion, I think, in terms of investments and commitments, at least, I think is really important. But the idea that these new jobs are something like 20 to 21% higher than the current average wage in the state is really promising, because ultimately that's what we're looking for, right? It's not just growth in terms of number of jobs, but actual wage growth, high-tech jobs, high-paying jobs, and we're starting to see that more and more. And this is the proof in the pudding that statistically it's going there.
As you look at the numbers, Murray, whether it's the average wage, foreign direct investments, so a lot of international companies, Saab and Salimtech and some of these international companies as well.
Well, you know, I believe the IEDC is maybe the most high-performing agency of state government. This doesn't happen by chance. They've been intentional in terms of international travel and so forth. And I think the increase in average wage is intentional as well. I think there's a more of a concern about that in IEDC and frankly for local governments as well with economic incentives.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's always, I mean, this news is always very positive, but I think it's always important not to be the person who rains on the parade, but it's important that we recognize that these are commitments.
Yep.
And a commitment is not a job created. And if those commitments aren't made and incentives are tied to that, then I would hope that state government is taking the appropriate measures to get our investments back through the clawbacks.
Absolutely. You mentioned tech expansion. Interesting, the VC and the venture capital world, more focus, Indiana coming into more focus there. Chicago VC firm announced, M25 announced plans to really grow its presence here in Indianapolis, and Katie Burge, who had led the co-working space downtown, Launch Indy, taking over there.
Yeah, I think that it's a great move to get somebody like Katie Burge, who's obviously got a very good reputation in the tech community, Indiana tech community already. But what I like about M25 in particular is their focus on venture capital investments in the Midwest solely. And Indiana has reaped some real benefit from that already, and the idea that they would put an office here now, I think, is a step in the right direction for continuing to grow that as well.
One more for you, Norris. Anantha Shaker, very high-profile scientist, entrepreneur, started a number of companies here in Indiana, leaving the IU School of Medicine, going to the University of Pittsburgh, going to be their top, I think, research guy there, and head the med school there. Big loss for Indiana, really.
Yes, it is. It's a big loss. I think that a lot of what's been done, though, with respect to the growth in life sciences and health sciences in Indiana generally, it has been fantastic. The Precision Health Initiative that he helmed, some really lofty goals there that hopefully will continue. They were looking at trying to cure at least one cancer in the next 10 years, cure one childhood disease within the next 10 years. And so hopefully those things will continue to move forward without him. But yeah, it's a big loss to see him go to Pittsburgh.
Laura and Murray, I'll give you the last word on the legislative session, short session underway as you look at anything spectacular coming out of the session.
This is kind of the session where the rule is to do no harm since it's an election year. But I think that it's definitely going to be interesting, especially as we look at teacher pay. It doesn't appear that there's much political will on the behalf of the Republican caucuses to push that forward. However, I think it could really resonate with folks at home and in their communities, and especially in the ballot box this year.
Well, I think teacher pay will be an issue, but I also think educational issues in terms of testing and the governor's very interested in that. I think you'll also hear discussion about healthcare costs.
Kevin Brinegar said he thinks that'll be one of the big.
I think it's worth reminding ourselves it's only a short session. We have 2 months. Healthcare cost problems are a huge problem, but I think that the governor has supported an end to surprise billing, and then a more comprehensive claims database, so we can start with a strong data background as we look at
It'd
this
be nice
issue.
if we could get smoking, if we could get that smoking age adjusted.
And
It'd be very
I
nice
think
if we could
there's
make progress
pretty
there.
much a consensus on that. That might happen.
How about the cell phone bill? How about
the
no cell phones when you're
distracted
driving?
I think that would be great.
That'll get some
Thank
attention
you.
too.
Yes,
That'd be excellent.
absolutely.
It's all the time we have for another edition of The Insiders. Murray Clark, Laura Beck, Norris Cunningham, thank you one and all.
Thanks.
And we'll be
It's always
right
good to
back
be with
after
you.
this.